So in this video I'm going to take a look at the races I had on Oran Park a couple weeks ago. And it is probably my second favorite track in the Skip Barber schedule after New Hampshire. But it is just a great racetrack, and it's so cool that the track no longer exists. It's actually been paved over. I guess it would be a housing development by now. But it's cool that it's been preserved in iRacing and that we can go on racing it. It is one of the, like I said at the end of the last video, it is one of the gems in iRacing's track roster. It is just fantastic. It is both windy and has a lot of elevation change, so you're up and down, and it just throws the car around. So in the practice session a few minutes before the race, I noticed that Dale Earnhardt Jr. was running some laps, so I figured he would be in the race with me, and that's pretty cool. Dale Jr. he's played iRacing longer than I have, and he's been a fairly significant advocate and supporter of iRacing for a long time. It's kind of nice to see him in this series. It kind of shows that there's a little bit of buzz around the Skip Barber series lately. Just the fact that the car is one of the first ones to get the new tire model, the new damage model where the wheels can like literally fall off. Just the fact that the people that develop iRacing, like, they know who the top few drivers are in this series is pretty cool as well. I was feeling good for this race, and I managed a pretty good qualifying session, putting in a 1:16.1. The top three drivers though were in the 1:15 range, and the top driver was close to a 1:14. Okay, coming quickly down into turns 1 and 2, this is one of the trickiest sections of any road course, and you definitely do not need any help screwing up here. I could sense the car on my left getting by. I stay wide, narrowly avoid the grass on the right hand side, and luckily able to get around most of the cars and actually end up in second place. Let's take a look at the replay from a couple different angles. My position is going to be short-lived though here. I make one crucial mistake. Now I'm behind Edwin, and I know he's probably the fastest driver here. He goes a little wide, allowing me to catch up, but I don't anticipate his braking properly. Knowing he's the fastest driver, I must have thought his car was going to go through this tight turn, defying the laws of physics. But the moment really shook me off that game. I pushed the brake pedal so hard, I nearly knocked it off the platform I was using. There's already a car beside me. Now, still feeling pressure from the cars behind, I don't look into this corner correctly. I don't pick the right line. I take it too tightly, and it actually kicks the back end out. And if I had lifted off the throttle and kind of modulated it a little bit, I would probably be able to hold my line. But I just hesitated to do that and ended up having to save it. With the tires cold, it took a lot to correct the car, and people end up passing me. I know they're faster, but I really shouldn't be making it that easy for them. So right now I really need to settle down, regain focus, and get back into it. And going into turn 1, here's more proof of just how deadly turn 1 is. The red car gets loose on the inside. So just out of curiosity, I took a look at Dale Jr.'s race, and he was a couple cars behind me for most of the race. He ran slower average lap times, but his best lap was better than mine. And it looks like he raced the track the next week as well on Zandvoort. So it looks like he possibly might stay in this series, which is kind of cool. By the time I got into the bridge, I was feeling better, and I started hitting my marks. My mental focus came back. I just started telling myself to just pay attention to every detail. There's really zero room for error on this track. I used to remember taking this last turn always in first gear, but it seemed faster this week to take it in second, and I think that's the correct way to do it. Let's take a close look at the first section. What makes this section so difficult is the kink in the road, which offsets the balance of the car going into turn 2. If you don't straighten the wheel before heavy braking, the car just goes sideways. So you have to coast across turn 1, get straight, and then brake. And you really need to perfectly time the downshift so that you land in first gear just before the turn 2 apex. So skipping ahead, I'm just going to take a look at my best lap, which was lap 10. And I did a time of 1:15.350. So getting sight of the turn from as far back as you can, really aiming to keep the car on the inside. The whole setup is so you can get to full throttle as early as possible and use all the track limit to the outside right, right up to the wall. So while you're heading down the front stretch, spend most of your time trying not to think about how horribly turn 1 can go. Find the kink in the road, coast across it, straighten the wheel, brake hard, 4th, 3rd, 2nd, 1st, and track out on the right side. From 4th gear down to 1st for this right-hander. Briefly back up to 3rd and then down into 1st, and then up the hill for the bridge. This track is just so much fun. Approaching the crest, turn in very early as you can without running onto the orange curving on the right side. Early again for the right-hander, and just everything goes smoother if you turn in early on these turns. As straight as you can through the dogleg. Now, I was doing really well up until about lap 18. I mean, I really couldn't have been driving better, but I started feeling pressure from a car behind that was catching me, and really just should have found a way to let him by. But I had this thought going down the front stretch that, but literally the words in my head were, oh no, he's going to be all up my ass in turn 1. And just that negativity kind of forced me to overshoot the turn, and I dropped into first too early and spun out. So, I mean, instead of being afraid of the turn, I'm now afraid of the turn and being passed or rear-ended in the turn. And I didn't apply my brakes properly or the same way I had been, and it would have been so much better to just find a way to let this guy by, and I still would have got 5th place. Now, because of the spin, I ended up in 7th, and I did get a fairly significant iRating bump from this race, but it just could have been so much better if I ended up in 5th, and I need to learn from these just stupid mistakes and kind of control my inner dialogue while I'm racing. It was the only negative thought I had during the entire race, and it just kind of popped in my head and affected my turn. I did run one other race after the first that night, but I kind of felt like my mental energy had come down. I just didn't have as much of an effort to put into this race, unfortunately, and I only managed an 8th place by the end. Also, as this race went on, there were kind of some bad vibes. The 2 cars ahead of me were constantly having collisions and kind of yelling at each other over the voice chat, and I just wanted to stay out of it, honestly. It did eventually end in this crash. I also found it surprising during this race how much you can kind of cut the crest of the dogleg and not get a penalty, and you can just see how much the suspension is getting kicked around there in the slow-mo. A few days later, I came back, and I was a little closer to form, although I blew my 2nd lap in qualifying and only managed 9th on the grid. But what I want to talk about with this race is kind of an ongoing issue I've had with either my driving or just iRacing in general. It's when you don't trust the cars in front. Like, what do you do? Because I'm probably a little faster than the 2 cars ahead, but the more I watch them drive, the less I feel that I can trust them. And it's not like they're bad drivers or that they're going to intentionally wreck me. It's just a sense that I don't trust them enough to get beside them. So I end up getting stuck behind them, watching their mistakes, knowing that I'm a cleaner driver and not getting anywhere in the race. And in this instance, I made the right call because I do eventually wreck. But I've also had many races where I'm reluctant to pass and I just don't get anywhere, and I guess the only thing you can really do is hold off till later in the race. But then what if they're slowing you down and the cars that you can keep up with are actually getting away from you and you're not getting anywhere? I've had this issue many times in the past, and it's just like, how aggressive should I be? Because it almost feels like 50-50. If I go for them and pass them and it works out, that's great, but if they wreck me, it's almost like I knew it was going to happen and I asked for it. So it's just one of those things. I'm not really sure what else to say about it. Kicking dust up in every turn, under braking, going wide of the road and going onto the grass, hitting the wall. That car goes wide of the tight turn, and then they bunch up, and then I get bunched up again going up the hill. black car is going to go wide of the road and then shoot back on, pushing the pink car to the left. He does the exact same thing on another lap, except the pink car isn't quite as close. And eventually he gets completely loose and takes out the pink car, which I kind of knew was going to happen all along, but I mean, honestly, it's nothing I haven't done. And if you saw my last video, you'll see me do it, but still, better him than me, I guess. So after that race, I was happy with 5th place, and you know what? I didn't feel like I had another skip race in me. Honestly, I mean, I'm an old man. They take a lot out of me. I decided to jump into just a random F3 race, which was probably a stupid idea with no preparation, no practice, no setup, really no clue of what I was doing, but I had fun anyway. Going down the straight here, I just remember thinking just how great it is to just drive a different car and just hear a different car. Someone shouted out into this next turn, "I don't want any part of this!" And I kind of felt the same thing. I eased onto the braking pretty early to get through this accident. Had to avoid another car on my left and made it through there. But immediately, once I settled into the actual driving of the track, which is in the next few turns, I just felt really timid and tentative going into the turns and not attacking them very aggressively. Just the lack of practice was showing almost immediately. I'm only going to show one lap of this race. Hell, I should just call this the lap 1 show. I actually hit the pit limiter on the straight, not knowing what my button config was. After the race kind of settled down, I was pretty much driving alone for the entirety of the race, and it was pretty boring. I made too many assumptions about this race, like where the pit lane even was, how much fuel I needed. I mean, it was kind of a disaster because I ended up having to pit mid-race when no one else had to pit because I didn't take on enough fuel, and I had too slow of an aero package, which means people were just passing me at will on the straights. It just makes me wish I had more time to race something else besides a skip barber, but it is very hard to even just be competitive in that series, let alone take on another car. Had a bit of a funny moment going down the straight towards the chicane. I actually have to dodge a loose tire that's on the track. And as far as I know, that actually can damage your car. I was just curious to see how that happened, so I went back and looked at the replay. And I guess this car gets loose, goes into the wall, and I guess that would do it. As I go flat out through Eau Rouge, you can just see the effect of not having a proper setup for the track and a proper aero package. I think the last track that I drove was Oran Park, and this is the same setup I had there, so not really appropriate for Spa at all. A day or two later, I'm back to the Skip Barber for race 4. So coming down into turn 1, I actually bail on the turn. The car is partially out of control anyway, so I just opt to keep it straight rather than spin on the grass. As I come back onto the track, I'm expecting better grip, but it's actually worse, and I slip, and I actually almost hit the car beside me, and he almost hits another car. So I kind of did those guys wrong a little bit. Very odd that the grass actually has more grip than the road. It's only with cold tires that I've noticed this, but it is definitely a thing. Now as I go over the left-hander, just watch my steering wheel and how much better I anticipate the car getting loose on exit. Now, there's going to be an accident up ahead, and I'm going to, literally by the skin of my teeth, just narrowly avoid death. Just gonna have yet another mistake in turn 1. I think in this instance what happened is I took my eyes off the road to look at the cars in the distance, and somehow that affected my overall sense of the distance of the turn. I think what typically happens is not braking hard enough in a straight line and then rushing too quickly through the gears. The gears really affect the balance of the car, especially when you're dropping into second and first. Right after that, the car behind me comes through the kink at warp 9 and joins me in the spin section. Still getting up to speed now from the spin. I let this car go by and make the position back almost immediately. A little while later, I'm able to make a pass on this car going into turn 1. So race 5 is the last race of the week, and I qualified in 3rd place, although it doesn't look like I'm 3rd place on the grid right now. I wonder if the other car had timed out. I end up having a pretty okay lap 1, although the white car behind me is just filling up my rear view mirror on every corner, really showing that he wants to get by, that he's faster, and he's pushing the car harder than I am. And by the final turn, he's literally shoving his car up my tailpipe, and I let him by. I'm just hoping here that he has the skill to keep his car under control as he gets by on the left, and he does. And once again, my rearview mirror is getting filled up with a brown car now, and feeling the pressure, I make a crucial, very regretful mistake here. And I was wondering all week how dangerous this outside left curb was going to be, and every time I went up it, I went up it 20 times a race without issue, and I just went a couple inches too wide in this instance and caught a bit of dirt. Now I really needed to hold the brake a tiny bit longer, turn the wheel more, and look all the way up the hill before I committed to full throttle, and I didn't do that. I didn't set up the turn quite perfectly. I committed to full throttle too early and went a bit wide. I noticed that this car is having a little bit of trouble in turn 1. I'm able to get by him. Was wondering for a second if he was going to box me out, but he lets me by. So I guess the real takeaway from this week, with all the mistakes that I've made, is just to be more consistent on this track. And I almost feel like if I could even drove slower, but wasn't having these spinouts and these kind of idiotic mistakes, I'd probably be getting better results even with slower lap times. So the next time this track comes around, I'm really going to just think about that. And obviously I need to drive fast, but I also need to stay on the track. And then a little bit later I get a gift in the same corner. These two cars get into it. Had a bit of a regretful incident towards the end of the race. It was the second last lap, and in the last turn, a car ahead was going really slow, and I just assumed that he was going to stay left, which he doesn't. He actually takes the racing line away from me, and I end up hitting him. And our cars kind of got stuck together, and then I assumed he was going to go, and then he slowed down again. It was kind of a mess. I'm pretty sure most drivers would have stayed left there, but it turns out he was actually a D driver with very little experience. The onus is on me to kind of adapt to the situation. These were my results. The next week's track was Zandvoort. I managed to get a little bit of practice on that track and was running some pretty good laps, but rolled my ankle at work, so I'm going to be taking a break from iRacing for a little bit.